Picture a brand new cruiser in 1976, 34 feet, teak decks, a parquet cabin sole, brass lamps, even curtains in the windows. A complete family yacht, and the price on her was $25,000, a fraction of anything built in America. Families lined up, nearly 3,000 of them shipped in a single decade. That boat was the Taiwan trawler, the CHB, and here is what nobody tells you. The very things that made her a bargain are the reason she is a trap today. Because right now, that same boat, more than 40 years later, sells for about $15,000, sometimes less. And even at that price, she just sits. Nobody wants her. I have crawled around in the bilges of these boats, and I will give it to you straight. Most of the cheap ones are a trap, but not all of them, and the difference between the two is worth real money. So here is the question I want you to hold on to. How does a boat outlive the man who built her, outlive the importer who sold her, outlive 40 winters on the water, and still end up worth less than the pickup truck you would tow her home with and still not sell? The answer is not that she was junk. The answer is hiding under the teak. And to understand it, you have to go back to the boatyard where the whole gold rush started. It started with a New Jersey man named Don Miller, who ran an importer called Marine Trading International. In the middle 1970s, Miller went looking for a way to put an ordinary family onto a real cruising boat without the price of a house attached to it. He found his answer in Taiwan. Labor there was cheap, the yards were hungry, and a respected American naval architect named Ed Monk had drawn a handsome 34-foot aft-cabin trawler that any working man could look at and want. So Miller started shipping them home, and for the money, the boat was almost unbelievable. Think about what $25,000 put on the water. A full displacement cruiser, 34 feet of her, smothered inside and out in teak, a parquet floor in the saloon, berths fore and aft, instruments, curtains, the works. In America, a boat like that cost 3 or 4 times as much. Miller's trawler undercut all of them, and the market did exactly what you would expect. It stampeded. It is estimated he imported more than 3,000 of these in a single decade. His boats even earned their own name on the docks, Marine Trader, and for a while it looked like he had the whole thing to himself. He did not. That is the trouble with striking gold. Everybody sees the wagon come back full. And this is the idea I need you to carry through the rest of this story. A cheap price is not a discount. A cheap price is data. When a thing that should cost 100 grand is handed to you for 25, that gap is telling you something true about how she was built and about who pays the difference later. In 1976, nobody was listening. They were too busy lining up. If your father ever brought one of these home in those years, smelling of teak oil and diesel, you already know the pull of it. But the data was there the whole time, screwed down into the deck. And reading that data, telling a real bargain from an expensive mistake, is the single most useful skill for anyone shopping an old boat. So let me actually hand you the start of it. A rock-bottom price only ever means one of 4 things. She is honestly old and fairly priced, and that is the deal you want. Or there is a hidden defect the seller is quietly walking away from. Or the whole type has been blacklisted by the market, so she is cheap now and unsellable later. Or the seller is simply motivated, a divorce, an estate, a storage bill piling up, and you have found a sound boat priced to move. Your entire job before you write a check is knowing which of those 4 you are standing in front of. I put the full system for doing that into a guide called The Complete Owner's Vault, the 10-minute walk-around, the 5 deal killers you test yourself, and the 1 ratio, cost to fix divided by asking price, that tells you deal or trap in a single number. If you are anywhere close to buying one of these, scan the code on your screen or grab it from the link in the description. It will pay for itself on the first boat it talks you out of. Now, back to the gold rush. By the end of the 1970s, the copycats had arrived, and they did not arrive politely. At the center of it was a man named Sinclair, who owned the Chung Hwa Boat building company down in the port city of Kaohsiung in southern Taiwan. Chung Hwa is where the name CHB actually comes from. Those are her initials. Win's yard, founded back in 1971, turned out trawlers and a line of sailboats called Lafitte, and Win was a sharp operator. In the late 70s, he bought a share of another design, the Cady Krogan 42, a genuine blue water passage maker. I want you to remember that boat, because it becomes important at the very end. But Chung Hwa was only 1 yard among dozens, and here is where the story turns strange, and where the trap quietly gets built. Most of these trawlers were not really separate boats at all. A hull would be popped out of one central mold, then farmed out to small family shops for the finishing work. The same 34 or 36-foot trawler would come back wearing a completely different name, depending on who ordered her that month. Albin, CHB, Marine Trader, DeFever, C&L, North Sea, Hershine, Puget, on and on, more than a dozen badges on what was often the very same boat, with quality that swung wildly depending on which family did the work. The proud American yards took one look and sneered. They called these boats Taiwan Tupperware and Eastern Junk, and refused to have them in the water next to their own. But some of the men in that scramble were serious talents. Arthur DeFever drew a line of real blue water cruisers that earned a good name and were promptly copied everywhere. A designer named Bill Harden drew a lovely little cruiser called the Coaster 33, originally built by Chung Hwa itself, and within a season, the look-alikes were pouring out of yards under names like Heritage and Golden Gate and Far East. One man who had worked at C&L, Alexander Chu, went off and started Ocean Alexander, a company that still builds million-dollar luxury yachts today. The talent was real. The problem was that everyone was copying everyone at a dead sprint. Now, mechanically, the boats themselves were honest and simple, and this part matters. Down below sat a single Ford Lehman diesel right around 120 horsepower, or a little less often a Perkins 6.354. These are not fast engines, and they are not fancy engines. They turn slow, they run naturally aspirated, and they sip roughly 1 liter of fuel per mile at a gentle 6 to 8 knots. According to the late engine guru Bob Smith, a Ford Lehman that is actually looked after can run 20,000 hours before the block needs touching. 20,000 hours. That engine is the single best thing about the whole boat, and I am going to ask you to hold that thought, because it is also the reason a few of these are absolutely worth saving. So picture the peak of it, the early 1980s, teak trawlers pouring out of Taiwan by the score, complete boats for a fraction of an American price, styling so timeless that a 1978 model and a boat built 20 years later are almost impossible to tell apart. For one long moment, it truly was the deal of the century, but that price was still data, and a dozen yards racing each other to the bottom were making two quiet decisions that nobody in the showroom could see. The first decision was the teak deck. The second was the fuel tank. Hold both of those, because between them, they have sunk more of these boats, financially, than any storm ever did. First, understand how fast this thing was really moving. Don Miller told a story that says all of it. He was standing in the yard in Taiwan and ordered 23 specific changes to his design. 23. 2 weeks later, he was back home, opened a boating magazine, and there were his competitors advertising the exact same 23 changes. That is not an industry. That is a feeding frenzy. And in a frenzy like that, quality control is whatever the finishing shop feels like on a Tuesday. You can still find the fingerprints of that hurry today. Owners who have stripped these decks down have discovered that half the screws were simply never there, because on the line, a screw not used was a spare screw saved for the next boat. Others found the original fiberglass deck had never even been swept before the teak was laid down on top of it. Bumps in the way? No problem, just plane the teak flat. So now it is thick in some spots and worn paper thin in others. One boat would have hand-carved dragons on every cabin door and wiring nobody can explain. The next would have beautiful joinery and windows that leaked from the first rain. It was a lottery, and the buyer never knew he was holding a ticket. Now let me be fair, because the whole truth matters more than the easy insult. The holes underneath all of this were usually the good part. They were hand-laid solid glass, and most were genuinely overbuilt, drowned in resin, which is why serious blistering and osmosis is actually less common on these than you would guess for the age. And after about 1981, the better yards really did tighten up their quality. There are good ones out there. I am not going to stand here and tell you every Taiwan trawler is junk, because that is a lazy line the docks have repeated for 40 years, and it simply is not true. But those two factory decisions were baked into almost all of them. A teak deck screwed down through something like 1,000 individual holes, straight into a wood cord deck, and buried underneath a fuel tank welded up out of plain mild steel. In 1976, both of those looked completely fine. Both of them were, in truth, a clock, and that clock has been ticking through 40 winters of rain ever since. Here is what happens when it finally goes off. Water is patient. Water always wins. On a teak deck, the wood is pinned down by hundreds of screws and sealed between the planks with caulk. For the first few years, that caulk does its job. Then the sun bakes it, the boat works and flexes in a seaway, the seams open up, and one day water finds its way past a single screw. Now it is inside the deck, and it does not politely sit there. It runs downhill to the lowest point, which on these trawlers is about 2/3 of the way aft, and it pools, and it soaks straight into the wood core sandwiched between the fiberglass skins. This is exactly why an old hand walks a deck, tapping it with a screwdriver handle. A solid deck answers back with a sharp, clean talk. A wet, rotten core answers with a dull thud, like knocking on a wet cardboard box. On a neglected Taiwan trawler, you hear a lot of thuds. The community even has a name for these boats that tells you everything. They call them leaky tikis. And here is the truly cruel part, the place where the two time bombs meet in the dark. That low spot 2/3 aft, where all the water collects. On a lot of these boats, that is exactly where the builder ran the fill pipe down to the fuel tank. So the water that came in through the deck now drips down onto the top of a mild steel tank and rusts it out from the outside, while the diesel slowly rusts it from the inside. A flexing hull works the welded seams until they weep, and getting a corroded steel tank out of one of these can mean cutting open the deck or the cabin sole to lift it, then building new tanks small enough to fit back through the hole. Figure very roughly $10 a gallon of capacity for the tank, plus a few thousand in labor, and on a bad one, the access alone can push that bill toward the value of the entire boat. And this is where the word trap in the title really earns its place, because it reaches the engine too. I told you the Ford Lehman is the best thing on the boat, and it is. A well-kept one basically runs forever, but read that sentence again. Well-kept. The Lehman that has spent years drinking from a rusting, water-fed tank, sipping diesel laced with rust and condensation, idled a few times a season and never truly worked, is a very different animal. Now add in that engine hours are the single most fake number on any boat, and an hour meter is one of the easiest things in the world to unplug. A tired or neglected diesel in one of these is not a Saturday fix. A proper repower on a trawler this size, a fresh pair of Cummins diesels, or a full Ford Lehman overhaul runs anywhere from $30,000 to $80,000 by the time the yard hands you the keys. That is the diesel trap. The one engine that can last 20,000 hours can also hand you a bill bigger than the boat, if the last owner let the tank quietly feed it rust. It does not even stop at the deck, and the tank, and the engine. On the worst of them, water that soaks the superstructure softens the whole cabin frame from the inside. Worse still, if bilge water has gotten into the hull stringers, the long wooden beams that stiffen her, that wood rots too, and the hull itself begins to flex in a seaway. And when the hull flexes, everything bolted to it flexes with it: the engine alignment, the prop shaft, the cabin, the deck fittings. That is the kind of trouble you cannot buy your way out of cheaply. So now walk up to that $15,000 trawler with clear eyes. If the teak decks are original and she has spent her life sitting outside in the weather, you are very likely buying a saturated deck core and a rusting tank at the same time. And the bill to set both right can be more than the sticker price. A cheap boat that quietly costs you $20,000 to make sound is not a $15,000 boat. It is a $35,000 boat wearing a bargain's price tag, and she will still be worth $15,000 the day you finish. And even if you take all of that on with open eyes, the modern world has moved against her in two more ways that ambush people. The first is insurance. Most insurers now demand a recent survey once a boat passes about 20 years, and plenty of them will not write a hull over 30 at all, or only through a specialty market that depreciates her to almost nothing and pays you almost nothing when something goes wrong. The second is the marina. A lot of marinas will not grant a liveaboard slip to a boat over 30 years old, and some want a current survey before they will rent you the water at all. So the cheap ticket to the boating life can turn into a boat you cannot insure and cannot dock. Not one word of that is in the listing. Now you can see why she sits unsold. It was never one problem. It is a whole stack of them, and every single one traces back to the day somebody screwed teak down over an unswept deck to save a few dollars a boat. The low price was data the entire time. This is everything it was trying to tell you. So let me finally answer the question I put to you at the start. How does a boat outlive her builder, her importer, and 40 hard winters, and still end up worth less than the truck that tows her and still not sell? Here is the answer, and it is not the one you will hear on the dock. She survived because of precisely where the cheapness went and where it was skimped. The money went into the hull, solid, overbuilt, hand-laid glass that is genuinely hard to kill, and that is why 40- and 50-year-old examples are still out there floating today. But the savings came straight out of everything bolted on top: the teak laid in a hurry, the mild steel tank, the finishing lottery. The market never blacklisted the hull. It blacklisted the teak and the tank. And since nobody gets to buy only the good half of a boat, the whole vessel got dragged down to $15,000 and left sitting there. A new 36-foot trawler today will run you north of $500,000. The good sorted classics from this era trade between $50,000 and $100,000. And the rough ones, the original teak boats nobody will touch, have sunk to $15,000 or $20,000 and simply stopped depreciating because there is nothing left to lose, which is where the through line finally pays off, and it cuts both ways at once. A cheap price is data, and once you can actually read that data, the very same trap flips back into an opportunity for one specific version of this boat and no other. That is the entire point of what I do here. Not to talk you off the water, to get you onto the right boat with your eyes open. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from, and if you have got one of these tucked in a slip somewhere, tell me honestly whether she has been a dream or a money pit. And if you want to watch a cheap dream turn into a money pit even faster than these trawlers managed, I made a video on exactly that. The rise and fall of the Gibson houseboat, the $20,000 floating home that became a nightmare. It is the perfect companion to this one, the same story of a cheap price that was trying to warn you all along. To watch it, All you have to do is click the video coming up on your screen right now, and I will see you in there.